Hello and welcome to Audio Johnapedia number 43. It is October 19th, 2014. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have as far as an exciting intro. I'm John, of course. Hopefully everybody recognizes me by now. I have a guest with me on the air. I have Cole here. Cole, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is Cole Claybourn. I run the Cardinals blog High Stock Sunday, which is part of the Cards Conclave Cardinal Blogger Network. You can follow me on Twitter at highstock_Sunday. Talk about the Cardinals a lot. I tweet a lot about the Cardinals, so if you're into that, then follow me. That's all I've
All right.
got.
All right, solid plug. I feel like we got some information about who you are, so I guess we'll talk about the Cardinals. Sound good to you?
Yeah.
All right. And so anyway, the Cardinals season is over, so obviously now that there's not any actual games to talk about, we can talk about how there's nothing going on and how we're sad, but hopefully actually be able to break down what's happened in the last week or so, what we're looking forward to in the next few months. Before we do that, though, I want to wish you, good sir, a happy birthday.
Oh, I appreciate that. I feel pretty old now. I'm 25, so it's
I've been
kind of
25 for I've been 25 for several months now. It's really not that bad.
that's good to hear.
I hope there's at least one person listening right now that's like substantially older than 25 who's just really annoyed that these 25-year-olds are talking about how old they feel. But as a gift to you, I prepared a little list here. It's a list of the top sort of a baseball lineup card of guys who are younger than you are. So just keep in mind as I read these guys off that they are all younger than you, and they've all accomplished a lot in Major League Baseball. So there's that. If you want to guess on any of the players when I go position by position, feel free, but otherwise I'll just read them off.
Go ahead. Yeah, just read them.
All right, catcher, Salvador Perez, who will, of course, be starting in the World Series for the Royals. First base, Eric Hosmer, also will be starting for the Royals. Second base is actually a tie. And by the way, I'm going off of career wins above replacement
Okay.
up to this point. It's not really anything subjective on my end. Second base is actually a tie between Anthony Rendon of the Washington Nationals, Jose Altuve of the Houston Astros. Shortstop, we have Starlin Castro of the Chicago Cubs. Third base, Manny Machado of the Baltimore Orioles. Outfield, left to right, we have Bryce Harper of the Washington Nationals, Mike Trout of the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, Giancarlo Stanton of the Miami Marlins, and pitcher, we have Julio Teheran of the Atlanta Braves. How do you feel about that?
That's a pretty dang good team.
Yeah, like Madison Bumgarner's like a couple months younger than me, and whenever he started appearing in 2010, I thought, oh, that's cool. There's a player who's younger than me who's doing well in the major leagues. And then once I realized that you could field like the best team in the history of baseball of guys younger than me, that's when I started to really get worried. So
I'm actually surprised that Castro is up there in terms of WAR. I know he's kind of come on the last couple of years and played a lot better, but I remember the first couple of years he really struggled. So that actually surprised me. I wasn't surprised about the other ones, but I was kind of surprised to hear Castro on that list.
I think Machado has the edge because he's just played for so long. I think second was Andrelton Simmons, who I think was younger than you, but regardless, he was behind Castro just because Castro's been around for several years. But, I mean, regardless, though, you're looking at a pretty formidable lineup, but none of these guys are Cardinals, so let's move on to the actual topic at hand. So, Game 5 of the World Series was on Thursday. Did you watch the game?
I did.
Good.
It was
That would be a disaster for this if you didn't.
it was unfortunate, just the way that everything ended. I honestly tweeted before the game that the Cardinals really needed to get 7 innings out of Wainwright, or else I didn't trust Matheny to manage the bullpen for 2 innings, or for more than 2 innings. And he went 7 innings, and then sure enough, in those 2 innings, Matheny managed to sort of screw the bullpen.
I mean, we'll obviously talk more about sort of the different moves that were made because there is a lot to talk about, and to be perfectly honest, I think there's a lot of little moves in there that were totally defensible moves that people sort of jumped on in retrospect. But there's also moves that I questioned then and I question now, but you'll sort of go move by move here. And I'll be honest, going into the game, I had no expectation of the Cardinals winning the game. So I think my overall disappointment was sort of tempered by that, but definitely losing on a walk-off home run is not an ideal way to end your season.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the decision to start Wainwright, there were a lot of people who were concerned going into the game, that maybe he was hurt, maybe he was just ineffective for whatever reason. Certainly pitched well during it. How did you feel about the decision at the time? How did you feel after seeing what had happened?
I liked it. I mean, I think whenever you're at your season on the line, even though he might still be hurt, he's been adamant that he feels fine, that it was just a mechanical issue. And I think, he's been around the game for a long time, and he's kind of been your ace for several years now, and has been a gamer. I mean, granted, he hasn't pitched great in the postseason, but there's been plenty of times when he's come out and pitched really well in big games. So I think in that moment, people were saying maybe start Marco Gonzalez. I don't know. I think when your season's on the line, I think even though he might be hurt, I think you've still got to roll your guy out there who I think still gives you the best chance to win. And I think we were rewarded by the fact that he started, because it was a brilliant performance. And it's easy to say after the fact, but I honestly, I felt comfortable with it. I could have, if we had another guy who was somewhat close to Wainwright's ability level that was ready to go, I wouldn't have wanted to burn Lance Lynn, but I would have felt comfortable with him pitching that game. But I think I was most comfortable with Wainwright, so I was fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing there is it's not even so much that you're choosing Wainwright versus one of your other stars. You're choosing Wainwright over somebody that you probably didn't consider worthwhile of being in your playoff rotation to begin with. So, and Adam Wainwright, if he's right, or even if he's at X% of what he can be, is still going to be better than whoever you're trotting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my main concern going into the game wasn't so much that he was starting, it was that what if he goes out there, he's just totally flat, doesn't look like he has it, and he's kept in the game sort of for the subjective, he's a gamer sort of things, which if he doesn't have it, he doesn't have it, but obviously that wasn't a huge issue. He had obviously gave up a 2-run home run to Joe Panic of all people, but I mean, aside from that, pitched well and seemed to be getting stronger as it went along. So, I mean, it's hard to argue against that. It was also fun watching Keith Law kind of melt down on Twitter while watching the game. Were you following along with what his sort of
actually, your tweet actually tipped me off to it. I actually don't follow him because I can't stand him anymore. But last year, the first half of the season, he kept saying how Matt Carpenter wasn't an all-star over and over again, and it just, I mean, Matt Carpenter's my favorite player on the team, and so every time he would tweet, he tweeted this a lot, and then Matt Carpenter obviously had a brilliant year last year, so I would always just troll him about Matt Carpenter being an all-star, so I just unfollowed him. So I actually didn't see his tweets until you mentioned it, but then I looked back at his timeline, and it was pretty funny, because he was, if I read it right, he was thinking that, I guess, was it that Wainwright needed to be taken out of the game or something like that, or he couldn't understand why he was still in the game or something like that. I remember you tweeting how mad he was about it. So he's not one of my favorites. So I took some joy in that.
Yeah, he was starting the call for it around probably the 5th or 6th inning, saying that and he had a reasonable point in and of itself that Wainwright, you were concerned he was hurt, his pitch count was getting higher. The problem was that I feel like you can't just look at it sort of purely by pitch count, purely by anything like that. You have to look at what is the performance that he's putting up, and Wainwright was getting better as the game went along. Like he was striking guys out. He seemed to have his command. His velocity wasn't bad, and it could be one thing if he kept just serving up meatballs that were like line drives that just kept finding outfielders, but that really wasn't the case of what was happening. And it was a weird performance. It's hard to explain it, but it was what was happening. So it was certainly enjoyable to watch. Now, how did you feel about taking him out when the Cardinals took him out, which was after the 7th, before the 8th? You think that was too soon, too late, just right?
I actually thought it was the right decision to take him out after that, because if I'm not, I've heard people say that they read quotes from him saying that he was gassed or something after the 7th inning. I actually have not seen these quotes, but I've heard several people say that they read him saying that to Matheny. So if that is the case, then yeah, he absolutely had to come out. But even if not, I think that it was the right time to come out. I mean, you got, at the time they had a 3-2 lead, right? They bring in Neshek, and he unfortunately gave up the home run to Michael Morse. But I thought it was the right time to bring him out, because you got to trust your bullpen to get those 6 outs to close the game out. And I don't know. I think if he would have gone another inning, he may have been left just a little bit too exposed. And granted, the result may have still been the same, but I think you've got to, if you're the manager, I think you've got to go with that, with what he did, and hope that hope that your bullpen can get those last 6 outs.
Yeah, I think it was sort of one of the sillier things to complain about as far as Mike Matheny's moves during Game 5 was people who wanted, and these people really all came out of the woodwork as soon as Neshek gave up the home run. Like, people weren't saying this beforehand, saying you have to leave Wainwright in. And it's sort of like one of the things that I've always gotten
Right.
worried about Mike Matheny on in the past is what I like to call sort of managing to the narrative, which is that, it's a much more exciting, fun story if Adam Wainwright pitches a complete game, pulls a Chris Carpenter in 2011 against the Phillies in the playoffs, but you can't really manage with that in mind. You have to manage for whatever you think is going to help your team win. And Pat Neshek, up till this season, may not have been a great player, but this season he was an all-star for a reason. He absolutely deserved to be. It's hard to begrudge going against him. Now, if they had gone to a lesser reliever, which obviously would never happen in the situation, definitely didn't happen an inning later or anything like that. That's one thing, but it would be hard to. Now, what did you think about when Wainwright batted for himself? I can't. If it was in the 6th or 7th inning, I'm forgetting. I think it was in the 7th that he batted for himself. What were your thoughts on that?
I can't remember. I do remember batting for himself. I think at the time I was a little confused by it. I know he batted for himself, if I'm not mistaken, in the 5th inning too, and that was whenever he came out and struck out the side, or maybe not struck out the side, but had a pretty dominant 6th. I didn't remember that he batted in the 7th, so I'm not sure that I could speak to it a whole lot. But I just I remember thinking at the time whenever he did bat in the 5th that I was like, well, I'm a little surprised by that. So.
Yeah, well,
I don't know. I think in a close game, you maybe go to the bench and get an extra guy on base. I don't remember the situation. I don't remember how many outs there were, so that could have dictated it too.
Yeah, in the situation where he batted, it was 2 outs and nobody was on. So at that point, I was like, oh yeah, go ahead and let him bat, because
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense then, because you don't want to burn a pinch hitter just to get maybe a single and get a runner on base with 2 outs. If there's somebody on base and there's something you can get going, then maybe. But yeah, I think in that position, if he's still rolling, then you got to roll him out there and let him pitch, or let him hit.
The most desirable bat off the bench was going to be, who was it going to be at that point? Because you still had Bumgarner going. So, Tavares against a lefty maybe, or put in Borges, or there was nobody who was available that you were going to just really be excited about. And if there was, you wouldn't want to put him in that situation anyway, because the odds of a run scoring when you have 2 outs and nobody on are not particularly good.
Right.
So at that point, you might as well just go with Wainwright, because he may be as good of a hitting option as you have anyway. Aside from the guys that you can't put in.
The value of leaving him on the mound was probably greater than whatever value a pinch hitter could have brought to that position.
Yeah. Honestly, if they'd let him bat for himself and then had a reliever come in immediately, it would have been weird, but I would have understood what was going on. It would there would have been a definite logic to it, because at that point you're avoiding burning a player in a fairly hopeless situation, and saving him for a situation like happened in the 9th inning, where there were a lot more opportunities for pinch hitting.
Right.
Now, okay, so we agree then, it sounds like, we think Wainwright went about the right amount of time. I might have ended up pulling Wainwright earlier because I'm kind of a coward, but it worked, so I'm not gonna. It's one of those things where maybe it was the wrong decision, but it worked out really well, and I'm all about criticizing somebody who made at the time, strange decision that doesn't work out, but it is hard to go against it if it does work.
There's times that I think that there's unconventional things that Matheny does that end up working out, but I still don't always agree with the method. There's a lot of times people during the playoffs are saying, oh, well, this worked, well, this worked. It's like, well, that still wasn't really the right decision. So, I can't remember any of the specific examples that I'm thinking of. I just remember there was a conversation somebody was tweeting at me about. I think it was, for one of the last few games, they were just talking about how, Matheny made all these good decisions because everything worked out, and there are examples, and I'm just thinking, that doesn't necessarily mean, because it's so easy to come back after the fact and say it worked out and then be like, oh, that was the right decision, but sometimes you just get lucky.
Yeah, and one thing that Matheny did that really most managers do, and most managers ever have done, that a lot of Cardinals fans started to get on, was as far as keeping the starter in games beyond the 5th inning in the playoffs. And people always harken back to Tony La Russa in 2011. That's basically the one example kind of ever where a manager has been that extreme as far as pulling a starter right away. And a large part of why that was happening is because the starting staff for the 2011 Cardinals wasn't really that great, and the relievers were a lot more trustworthy. There were a lot of bats off the bench where if you wanted to pinch hit, you'd be able to put somebody in. And it's really just a matter of playing with the personnel you have. So I think that the overall strategy, while I think a lot of the Matheny moves haven't been the right moves, the overall strategy makes sense because the starters on this team are really one of the strengths of the team.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I mean, I think the bullpen is still a little bit on the young side, and they've still got a lot of experience to gain, and I think you're right. I mean, I think the rotation now is certainly better than the 2011 rotation. So if you got those guys out there, I think you got to stick with them as long as they're effective, because I would take John Lackey going into the 6th inning if he's still rolling rather than just going to a reliever for the sake of going to a reliever.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if the guy's losing effectiveness. I understand having a shorter leash then, but if the guy is pitching well, I mean, that's a pretty good asset to have. I mean, you can always go to a reliever. You can go to a reliever later, but you can't go back to a starter if the starter's pitching well. This isn't a sport with unlimited substitutions.
Mm-hmm.
You're out, and it's kind of hard to go off of. Now, one move that happened leading into the bottom of the 8th was, now Matt Holliday had made the final out in the top of the 8th, and Holliday was switched out for Peter Borges. So Peter Borges took over in the 9th hole, which was due up 6th in the 9th inning. What were your thoughts on the double switch? Were you okay with it? Because, I mean, the switch meant that John Jay moved from center to left, put Borges in center, take Holliday out. So obviously you're losing as far as the bat, but upgrading as far as the defense. Were you okay with the move? Did you disagree with it? Or?
I always am, a little bit nervous about taking Holliday's bat out late in a close game, because we've seen several times this season where he's been taken out of a game and the game goes to extras, and then you're stuck with Peter Borges hitting in his spot. And I certainly understood the reasoning behind it, because it's obvious that Mike Matheny values Randall Grichuk's defense, so he was going to leave him in right field. And then you've got a pretty solid defensive outfield, and I guess you just got to trust that Holliday's. I mean, he was taking a gamble that Holliday's spot would not come up again, and that this defense would help prevent any runs. But I mean, you can't defend a ball that's over the fence. So, when you run the risk of letting the game get tied and having to go to extras and playing without probably your best power hitter. So that was certainly a risk. I mean, I understand what he's thinking. I don't know that I would have the guts to make that move, because I think that in a close game, whatever happens, and maybe this is, I would be managing on the tentative side. I mean, maybe you could say that Matheny is managing to win there, which I certainly could understand that mindset if you're going to say that he's trying to put his team out there to close the game out with a good defense. But I don't know. It's a little bit nervous for me to take out my best bat in a close game.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword as far as taking out Holliday for Borges, because, I mean, it's clear what was going on. Anybody is going to agree that it's a downgrade on offense and upgrade on defense. And the thing is, you don't want to take Holliday out if the game ends up going longer and you need his bat. But at the same time, if the Cardinals had a big lead or were trailing by a lot or something like that, then it really doesn't. There's really not a whole lot of upside to the defense. There's pros and cons no matter what the game's circumstances. I don't know that it necessarily should dictate the overall strategy of whether you want to go offensive or defensive heavily. The thing that I sort of question about the move is the move really only makes sense if you plan on going multiple innings with Pat Neshek, which may have made sense in this situation because it's not like he was pinch hit for in the 9th, but obviously they didn't go that route. Because by having that move made, and eventually, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, having Oscar Taveras pinch hit for Borges, you're burning Borges, but you could have just had Taveras batting there anyway in the 9th spot, because no matter what happens, if the 6th batter coming up in the inning is going to be the pitcher spot, either you're not going to get to that spot because the offense doesn't do anything, or you're going to be in a position where it's going to be a really valuable at bat because there's going to be runners on, you're trying, or maybe some runners have scored already, but you can make the Borges move regardless. So that's sort of the one thing I question about it. Is just it'd be one thing if the inning had ended on like Colton Wong or something, but in that specific spot, I find it confusing.
What I thought Matheny should have done there was I thought he should have used Tavares to pinch hit for Cruz because now when you take out Borges, you're stuck with Oscar Tavares playing defense in the ninth inning of a tie game in a tough outfield that he hasn't played in. So I would have pinch hit for Cruz and then just let AJ Przinsky catch the rest of the game, however long it went, because I think he could have handled it. I mean, he likely would not have had to catch more than a few innings if it goes to extra innings, because how often do games go past 14 or so innings? So that was the move that I didn't really agree with. I thought you bring in Tavares there to let him hit for Cruz, and then you've still got Borges left in to play defense if you need it, because you obviously brought him in for a reason to play defense. So what's the point of only having him play defense for one inning and then putting a rookie out in right field, which is probably one of the toughest spots. Right field at that park is probably one of the toughest spots to play outfield, and you've got a guy who hasn't played there at all. So that was one thing that left me probably the most confusing on that half of the inning.
All right, and so let's talk a little bit more about the top of the ninth. You sort of brought it up, but the top of the ninth inning, there were a lot of moves that could have been made, a lot of moves that were made, a lot of moves that were perhaps not ideal. I'm pulling up the exact, because I want to make sure I don't mess this up. I want to pull up the exact sort of breakdown of what happened in the inning. The inning led off with, I believe it would have been Johnny Peralta. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. Yes.
Okay. I'm sort of biding my time. Well, for some reason, whenever I pull up Baseball Reference, it starts pulling up pop-ups on me. So I'll try to get here real quick. But anyway, going into the inning, for anybody who doesn't remember, it was 3-3. So while the Cardinals didn't need to score a run, it was certainly going to be very helpful to score one. Sort of an understatement of sorts.
I felt like they kind of had to. I didn't want to go into the bottom of the ninth tied, because the way that the Giants have won so many games this postseason. I mean, if you go back even to the LDS, winning out that basically they won on the pitcher throwing a wild pitch, who actually is from my hometown. I actually know him and his family really well, Aaron Barrett. But that was kind of hard to watch as a guy who knows him. But anyway, that's they've won games in such unconventional fashion that I just felt anything can happen if they just get one runner on base, and sure enough, that's what happened.
All right, so I was able to pull it up. So it starts off with Johnny Peralta. I think we both agree Johnny Peralta batting in that situation is the correct move. Doesn't even with his struggles at that point, who are you going to go to?
Right.
With nobody on that.
Because he can still run into one and hit one out of the park, so you got to leave him in there, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny Peralta this season was the best power hitter on the Cardinals. It would be fairly crazy, and he's also a really good defensive shortstop. So I mean, we agree with that. We're cool with that. He grounds out though, so it's 1 out. Next up is Matt Adams, draws a walk. I think we agree. Matt Adams, especially against a righty, you leave him in. All right.
They had some pretty good at bats against Casilla that inning.
Oh, they did.
Pretty good. He's been really dominant this whole postseason. So to come out and take a few walks and get on base and actually take him out of the game, I thought that was some pretty impressive at bats, especially from the bottom half of the order.
Yeah. Okay. So the next batter after Adams gets on with a walk is Grichuk. I think this was the first position where you could maybe argue for a pinch hitter, simply because the pinch hitter would have been Tavares. But at that point, there's not really a runner in scoring position. What would your thoughts have been if the Cardinals had, and Grichuk obviously got a single, so it worked out going with him, but had Tavares pinch hit, would you have been okay with that? Would you have wanted him later in the inning?
I would have been okay with it, because I don't think that Bochy would have gone to his relievers that soon, because he eventually went to Jeremy Affeldt to face Tavares because he had a lefty matchup there. But I don't know that Bochy would have gone. I mean, maybe he would have. Maybe he was anticipating whenever Tavares comes up that he's going to Affeldt. I don't know, but that's just a couple batters in, and I would think that he might stick with Casilla still. So if you can get Tavares in there to where he might be able to face a righty, then I would take that matchup over Grichuk versus a righty. Like I said, it worked out, and I'm not sure what Tavares would have done in that instance, but I think I would have been okay with that, because I think that you still get to leave in Peter Borges, who I think is a superb defender, superior defender to any of the other outfielders. So I would have been okay with it. leaving Borges in there in the outfield, but didn't happen that way. I wasn't, I'm not the manager, so you end up with Tavares out in right field for the last game, which luckily nothing happened to where he was compromised in that position, but it was still a very uneasy moment going into the bottom of the inning.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the thing is, Bochy could have countered with Affeldt. It seems like he would have had Tavares been pinch hit for because the next batter up was Colton Wong. I think he's perfectly okay with having a lefty going against those two guys, rather than having Casilla available to go against Tony Cruz and Peter Borges. I don't think this is as much of a threat.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean, regardless, Gritcha gets the single. Whatever criticisms I felt towards the move, it's sort of hard to argue against when it works. Which, I mean, I know process over results, all that, but I don't think it would have been a wildly terrible move, even if Gritcha could ground it into a double play.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next batter up was Colton Wong, but before that, with runners on first and second, Daniel Descalzo was brought in as a pinch runner for Matt Adams. Now, I have opinions on this move. Do you?
I understand it. I think you got to get speed there. The only problem is, and this isn't so much Matheny's fault as I think it might be. I guess in this instance it could be because there wasn't really a strong backup for Matt Adams at first base. But you got to at some point I think John Mozeliak needs to go out and get some guy that can spell Adams at first base, where they can put him in that situation where that kind of move isn't such a detriment, where you have to play Descalzo at first base. But as far as like the pure idea of getting somebody with more speed on base to score one run, I certainly understand that.
Yeah, I agree fundamentally with the idea of having a pinch runner there because obviously Matt Adams is not the fleetest of foot. I just don't know that Descalzo is that considerable of an upgrade. Descalzo's faster than Matt Adams. I'm not going to deny that, but I don't know that it's so much more so that I would risk going forward having Adams out of there, because as it stood, had the game gone to the top of the 10th, you would lead off with Carpenter and Jay, and that'd be fine. At that point, you have the pitcher spot coming up next after that, and then you have Daniel Descalzo as the cleanup hitter.
Right.
It's a little... I mean, granted, the bottom of the lineup was mostly fine at that point, but you're really risking the bottom of the 10th.
So, right, and I guess that's kind of... you can get into the mindset of that, and I think it's a lot different to manage like that during the regular season than it is in the playoffs. So, Matheny may have been just trying to get that one run that inning. I guess,
and that's what he was doing. And that's what he was doing.
I respect that idea, but I think that you've also got to weigh the odds of what are the chances that we actually score here, and say, we've got to trust our bullpen to get us to the 10th inning too, and I want to be prepared for that too. And I think there's a fine line where you've got to play for the win, but you've also got to be realistic whenever you do so. So that's I think I certainly understand both schools of thought. I might have been a little bit more on the side of leaving Matt Adams in there simply for defensive reasons too. I think even after his blunders earlier in the series, I think he's still a better defender at first base than Daniel Descalzo. So I think that you've got to weigh the value of what it actually is to bring in Descalzo in that position versus leaving Matt Adams in. And I think the value is probably slightly in favor of leaving Adams in.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of where my problem with it was. Like, if the Cardinals had Terrence Gore on their bench like Kansas City has, and you can stick him in as a pinch runner, I'd be all for it. But if it's a hard hit single to the outfield, I'm not sure that Descalzo is scoring there either.
Right.
I mean, Adams definitely isn't, but I'm not sure that Descalzo is that much of an upgrade.
Right.
In that sense. And obviously it represents a downgrade on defense at first base, but really a downgrade on the bat if it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the biggest thing too. Maybe not the biggest thing. I shouldn't say that, because I think the biggest thing was the defense. Because in the ninth inning you're playing to keep a tie, and you've got to have the best defensive, your best defensive personnel on the field. So that was, I don't know. I mean, I guess Matheny's hoping to get one run and then just shut it down after that, which even that notion you could argue is a little flawed given how bad their ninth inning relievers have been. So.
And Descalso definitely hasn't played enough at first base to be able to accurately gauge what kind of fielder he is at first base. But again, even if he were, Keith Hernandez in his prime, who was generally considered to be like the best defensive first baseman ever, like Descalso still wouldn't have a job as a major league first baseman if he were that good of a defender. Just because it's first base, that's kind of where you put somebody who's not the best fielder.
Right.
You want more power there, and you want more overall hitting ability. And I don't. It certainly that's something that needs to be addressed later on, and we're going to talk about that later as far as what can be done in the off season. But yeah, the lack of viable backup at first base of all positions, which is a position where seemingly backups should grow on trees, is worrisome. But anyway, Colton Wong stays in the game. I think we can agree Colton Wong batting there's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the guy's been on a tear. The only guy on the bench that could possibly, in any circumstance, pose more of a threat would be Taveras. And if you're not going to have Taveras come in for Grichuk against a righty, why would you have him come in for Wong?
Right.
So Wong has a ground out, force out at second, so it's first and third. And so Tony Cruz comes to the plate. This was the point where I'm screaming at my TV to pinch hit for Taveras. What were your thoughts on Cruz batting for himself?
I thought the same thing. I mean, you've got an extra catcher on the bench that you can use, and you're carrying three catchers. I mean, really at this point just two because Molina's hurt, but you've got Przinsky on the bench, and Cruz is not. I mean, granted he hit a home run earlier in the game, but I think that's more of an anomaly than anything else. I mean, I think you've got to go with a guy who has proven. I mean, Taveras hasn't gotten a whole lot of at-bats in the last month and a half, but whenever he has, he's put together some really good at-bats, and I think
Definitely.
he had a really strong finish to the season. And I think that it'll unfortunately go unnoticed because he didn't play a whole lot. He didn't do it, in the limelight a whole lot like Grichuk was always playing. But Taveras was really impressive to me over the last month and a half, and especially in his few at-bats in the playoffs. I mean, I don't remember exactly what his average was. I mean, he had the home run and he had a couple pinch hits and just put together some really good at-bats. So I thought at that point, you've got to, because I mean, whenever you bring in Taveras for Borges, that's it. You've got no outfielders left to use, and so I think at that point you've got to go with the guy where you can put in Taveras for Cruz. It's an upgrade at at catching, or an upgrade at hitting, and then I think you bring in a veteran in Przinsky to finish the rest of the game in a tie game. I think I like that value better than leaving Cruz in.
Yeah, as far as as I said before with Descalso, I don't think Descalso represented a clear upgrade on the base pass over Matt Adams, but I do think Taveras represents a substantial upgrade over Tony Cruz at the plate. So I mean, at that point, you can go ahead and play for one run if it's going to, in a material way, increase your chances of scoring the run.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Cruz ended up getting a walk, so it worked out. But I don't know that Taveras probably would have done the same.
Right.
I think it's a decent, for the sake of argument, just assumption that. So anyway, so Cruz walks, so the bases are now loaded. Peter Borges is coming to the plate, but Oscar Taveras comes in to pinch hit, so the Giants counter with Jeremy Affeldt, the lefty, instead of Casilla, the righty. It was fairly assumed by most people that if Taveras came up to pinch hit, the Giants were going to counter with Affeldt. Do you like having Taveras against Affeldt, which is a lefty-on-lefty matchup, more than you would have liked having Casilla against Borges, which would have been righty-righty?
I think so. I mean, I think as a pure hitter, I think Oscar Taveras is just a better hitter than Peter Borges. You can argue the splits, and I certainly understand the splits, versus lefties and righties and all that, but I think Taveras is still capable of running into one or even just putting one in the gap. I think he's got significantly more power than Peter Borges, and I think he's got significantly higher percentage of barreling a baseball up in that position than Peter Borges does. I mean, if you're honestly, I was fine with it. And, it was predictable because you knew that they were going to bring in a lefty, and I don't know that Tavares put together a great at bat. I mean, he ended up rolling over one and grounding out, but I still like the idea of letting a guy who has been a pretty dang good pinch hitter, this October, letting him hit in that position.
Yeah, I like if you ignore all other moves and what led to them up to that point, I like Tavares batting more than I like Borges batting. But I would have liked Borges batting more than I would have liked Cruz batting, which is essentially the decision that was made because
Right.
Tavares, if he had pinch hit for Cruz, they likely still would have gone with Affeldt. At which point, say Tavares has another weak grounder that they're only able to get one out on just because. But what happens with Borges if he's going against the lefty? Now, granted, Borges doesn't really have pronounced splits, but that improves his situation in general.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that would have been my concern. But I mean, I think at this point, we're kind of. This is all, talking about these different moves, this is all sort of child's play compared to what came next. Because what came next was where all of the heat came down from, not only from Cardinals fans, but from national baseball media in general, which was the decision to go with Michael Wacha to start the bottom of the ninth. Now, Michael Wacha, of course, had not pitched in the playoffs up until this point. And Wacha was brought in a straight substitution of Pat Neshek, who obviously had given up a home run in the bottom of the eighth, but after that, it was 3 straight outs for the Giants. I don't even know where to start with this one, so I will just start with this. What were your initial thoughts on Wacha coming in that situation, in a 3-3 game in the bottom of the ninth, in an elimination game? I know it sounds like a leading question, but go for it.
I was honestly baffled. And, if you follow me or really any other bloggers or, people that follow the Cardinals, I mean, the typical response to late innings is just to get onto Matheny about every decision. And this decision is so far different than any other because I don't think that there is any justification. I don't like. There's times whenever I've not agreed with what Matheny's done, but I can at least understand where he might be coming from. But it's been 3 days now, 2 or 3 days now, and I have not been able to come up with any sort of rational justification as to why Michael Wacha was in the game in this position. I mean, you're bringing in a guy who is a starter, first of all, and is not used to coming in the ninth inning. But that pales in comparison to the other reasons. You've got a guy here who has been struggling with a shoulder injury for almost the entire season, has pitched 4 times since his return, and hasn't thrown in a game in 20 days. And this is the most tense situation that they faced the entire playoffs. You've got a tie game in the bottom of the ninth on the road in an elimination game, and you've got other relievers who you've gone to and obviously shown a lot of trust in and a lot of faith in. But instead you go with the guy who you say you just wanted to get some innings in for, and you use him in a spot that is just so puzzling to use him. He hasn't. I mean, why? It's such a poor spot to put him in because you think about Tony La Russa. People would say he was really good about putting his players in a position to succeed, and there is no way that this is a position where Michael Wacha could have succeeded because it's so pressure packed. His changeup is not fully there. That's his out pitch, and I think that was the pitch that Ishikawa ended up hitting out. So it just was one of the things where as soon as he went in, I just was like, this is going to be so predictable. Like, there's no way they're going to get out of this. And it ended in a spectacular fashion, which is about, in one of the most epic ways possible. He gives up a walk-off 3-run home run. And then his explanation afterwards, which I don't know if you have the quote in front of you.
Yeah.
It was just so he basically, what he said was, that's not the position we want Michael Wacha to be in. But if we were in that position again, we'd put him in that position. That's essentially what he said. It was such a roundabout, convoluted quote that made no sense and did not help to give any sort of clarity as to why he was in that position. So I think I'll spend the entire offseason thinking about this and never coming up with the reason as to why that actually happened.
I think that there's one thing I want to throw out there, that this isn't really a defense of Matheny at all, but I think I should at least point out that I don't think there was a move that he could have made here that there wouldn't have been some criticism of, especially if he'd gone with Rosenthal.
Hmm.
Because I mean, Trevor Rosenthal has been his closer, obviously, and he had a bit of a interesting post game quote in regards to not wanting to have his closer pitch in a tied game in the bottom of the ninth. But I mean,
Hmm.
that's beside the fact. Had Rosenthal come in, and the chorus of anger about that would have also been there. Had Randy Choate come in, which I think would have also been a defensible move because he was coming in against Pablo Sandoval, who, although he's a switch hitter, is awful against lefties. There would have been criticism of that. Had he gone with Carlos Martinez or Seth Maness, it may not have been as heated of criticism, but there would also have been people saying, well, why don't you go with your closer then, if he's really the guy you trust? Had he left Pat Neshek in, there would be people who would be nervous saying that he wouldn't have been good going a second inning.
Hmm.
I personally, I think I would have gone with Neshek. I think that would have been my move just because I'm not that scared about his like pitch total or anything like that. With that said, I think there were probably 4 or 5 moves that had they been made, I may not have agreed with them, but I would have not been outraged about. Had they gone with Rosenthal, had they gone with Martinez, had they gone with Choate. But Waka wasn't one of them. Because the thing is, Michael Waka hadn't pitched in the playoffs up to this point, and what it suggested the whole time up to this point was that they didn't trust Michael Waka in a tough situation. And maybe they did trust Michael Wacha in a tough situation. They just weren't using him up to this point. But why weren't they then? I mean, the Cardinals have played in a ton of close games, and they never found room for him. And when it comes down to it, you couldn't possibly be in a. There's not a possibly more high leverage situation in baseball than in a game in which you're about to be eliminated, in which your entire season is over if the other team scores a run. Like, there's no tougher situation, no more important situation to not give up runs. And at that point, why would you go with an experiment? And if you didn't trust Waka to begin with, why was he on the postseason roster? If you didn't trust Waka in that situation, why was he pitching? And if you did trust him in that situation, why wasn't he pitching in previous games? Like, there's a fairly large disconnect here as far as following in a logical manner.
I think you make some really good points there, and I thought the game that Shelby Miller started, whenever he started to sort of fade out in the third and fourth inning, I thought that was a terrific time to use Michael Waka. But there's a chance that I could have been comfortable with Waka pitching the ninth, sort of like you alluded to. Had he been used in similar situations already this postseason, I would not have been as nervous about it, or I would not have been as critical about it. But he was not used once. That was literally his first. That was literally his first usage of the entire postseason. And so you think about it from that aspect. You have to wonder. I mean, I really am just honestly curious because we still haven't heard what the actual justification was for using him. And personally, I think I would have rather used Carlos Martinez. I thought he's been probably one of the better relievers on the in the bullpen this postseason, and I like him in that role. I mean, he's still young, but he comes out throwing heat, and I like him in that role. I think. I also would have been fine with Trevor Rosenthal because that's the guy that you have said. Here's who we trust in the ninth inning. As Matheny said, he's our king. We want him to feel like the king of the ninth inning. So I think you can't play for a future save whenever you still got to play just to hold on to a tie.
And the thing is, why would you play for a future save? Because if you bring in say the Cardinals get out of the ninth inning, they score 1 run in the top of the 10th. You bring Rosenthal into the bottom of the 10th. If you trust Rosenthal above any other reliever, which you could argue whether or not you should, you're putting him in a position where it's not as important that he not give up a run. Obviously, it would be terrible if you blew the save, but it wouldn't be as important as if it's a tied game. So why would it's? I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's sort of questionable to say the least.
I think the role of the closer has just become so focused on the save of the save stat, and I hate that because it really, I think managers probably won't admit this, but I think it dictates how they use their closers.
It definitely does.
They're so used to bringing them in with a lead in the ninth inning just to close it out, rather than using them in what should be a spot where you use your best reliever, and that's what I think the closer should be. I mean, it shouldn't just be a guy who racks up a stat, which is essentially what it's become to. I mean, before, I'm 25. I started watching baseball, for really started watching it in the late 90s, and before then, from everything that I've been told from my dad and people who watch baseball, closers would come in and throw 2 or 3 innings to close
Yeah.
out games, and now they're brought in to get 3 outs, sometimes even just 1 or 2 outs. And it's just the role of that has shifted. And even the stat of the pitcher wins has dictated how managers manage. They want to leave pitchers in for at least 5 innings to get a win, rather than saying you're not good right now, we're pulling you up to 4 2/3. So I hate that, especially because who cares about how many saves you have in the playoffs? You're more about, I get it during the season, you want to have a great save total, whatever. But in the playoffs, you got to play to win the game. Nobody really cares about who got to save that game. They're caring about which team won. So I think in that situation, tie game, ninth inning, elimination game, you've got to go with, like I said, I would have been fine with Rosenthal or Carlos Martinez. Those are probably they both come out throwing gas at that point, and I think I like that in that situation. I don't want anybody on base, so if you can get strikeouts or just have them, be late to pitches where they're going to pop it up, I want that guy out there, not somebody that is going to throw a changeup that they could leave it over the middle of the plate that they could barrel up and hit it out of the park, which is what happened.
Yeah. On the topic of postseason saves, as a side note, if you haven't looked at the stats that Mariano Rivera put up in the 1999 World Series, in which he won World Series MVP, you or anybody listening should go ahead and look up Mariano Rivera in the 1999 World Series and see just how wild people get as far as looking at saves, as far as determining awards, because he kept getting a bunch of 3-inning saves or 3-run saves with 1 inning pitched. That's neither here nor there. As far as, I mean, certainly guys are managing towards the save. I've heard it said before that the save is the only statistic in the history of sports that has essentially invented a position.
Yes.
Because guys create a closer basically to accumulate saves. The thing I want to know is if the Cardinals were hesitant to go with Trevor Rosenthal because it wasn't a save situation, because he was being put in a role that wasn't necessarily familiar to him, I mean, I can sort of stomach that argument from a mental aspect. It's not really something I can gauge personally. But then why are you putting Michael Wacha into the position? Like, it's much more of a position that Rosenthal is familiar with, pitching in a short stint in the middle to end of a game, than it is for Wacha, who hasn't had a relief appearance in years. As far as Wacha, what he did in the bottom of the ninth, obviously the first hitter was Sandoval. He got a single. Hunter Pence then had a fly ball out. So at that point, you have Brandon Belt, who's a lefty, coming up, and Travis Ishikawa on deck, who's also a lefty. At that point, I go with Choate.
I agree, and I said that as well. I said that, if you want to go with Wacha, okay, that's whatever. But whenever those situations comes up, that's the perfect time to go with Choate. And people obviously, Choate's kind of a pariah now, but I think in that situation, I mean, he's been so good against lefties that you've used him all year against lefties. You've used him all postseason against lefties. That's the highest leverage spot to get lefties out, and you don't go with your best lefty specialist. It just doesn't make any sense.
And I mean, granted, Brandon Belt wouldn't have gotten taken out in that situation for a pinch hitter. Ishikawa probably would have. They would have replaced him with, drawing a blank on his name, but Lopez, who would have been a better defender in that situation anyway, and is a righty. But at that point, I think, you have Choate face Belt and hope things go well there. If you decide at that point you want to take Choate out, well, that's Choate's normal workload is one batter. It's not like you're wasting him. You're putting him in a situation where he's facing one batter, but it's a very important batter, and it's a very dangerous batter. And, of course, Belt ended up walking, and then Ishikawa ended up hitting a home run. I mean, it was almost a superfluous home run, because if it hadn't gone over the fence, it was going to hit off the wall, and Sandoval was going to end up scoring. Or at that point, it was Joaquin Arias was going to end up scoring.
Yeah, it was sort of a Jeffrey Mayer type of situation, but at that point, it didn't really matter because everybody.
It really, unless Taveras had superhuman jumping ability. Which, by the way, what were your thoughts on Taveras in right, Grichuk in left, rather than the other way around?
I didn't like that at all. They say that left field is actually more spacious in that field, but I mean, if you look at the configuration of the wall in right field, I mean, even Hunter Pence has trouble with it. And that catch that he had in the LDS against the wall was pretty impressive. But he plays there, you know, 82 games a year, or however many games it is that he play. They play at home, and so I don't know, a guy who hasn't really played in the outfield at all, putting him in one of the what I think is probably one of the toughest outfield spots. I did not like that. Granted, he had a ball that he got to pretty well and made a nice play on, um, but his arm, he has a pretty strong throwing arm, but it's not real accurate. So if he's got to make a throw from out there, it just the ball gets down to the corner there, hits off some weird angles. It's just that could be a mess for him. And Grichuk's just faster, can get to the balls faster. I would have preferred Grichuk stay out there just because he had played there for 2 games. He's used to it, and then just put Tavares out in left field where it's just it's a straight wall. It might be spacious. There's nothing really odd about the configuration of the
conventional
wall.
major league outfield. I mean, I think I agree with you in terms of that. I mean, compared to Waka, it's really small potatoes. You're looking at if you're looking at corner outfielders and switching them, it's probably not going to make a difference. In this case, it definitely didn't make a difference. I mean, there was a put out for Tavares on the ball that Pence hit, but it's one that reasonably we could assume would have also been made by Grichuk, or Jay probably could have made it too had Tavares not been there. Crazy, but regardless, that didn't end up being a decision that made any sort of difference as opposed to the decision to pitch Michael Wacha. Mm-hmm. As far as this decision, I was trying to think about bad decisions that have been made in the playoffs in the past, and I said this at the time that it happened. Grady Little got fired for a way more defensible decision than this one from Red Sox teams that had won 95 games in the season. I don't know that. I don't think Matheny's gonna get fired or anything like that. But there aren't many decisions worse than this one. The one I could think of that I think is worse is in the 1986 World Series when the Red Sox left Bill Buckner out in the field to play first base, and the reason that was given was because they wanted him to be out in the field to celebrate when they won the championship. That's worse than this. But other than that, is there any context for this? Is there even a comparison for this one other than that, which would be worse?
I can't think of any. I mean, the only really bad decision that I can think of that La Russa made during the 2011 run was when he accidentally brought Lance Lynn in whenever he meant to call Mott or whatever the situation was. You remember that situation where the bullpen phones were not working. But I mean, whether he did it on purpose or not, whether it was an accident or not, that's whatever. But that's I can't think of anything that really compares to this. I mean, being from Evansville, Indiana, I follow Don Mattingly as well. He's from this town, so I follow. Even though I'm not a Dodgers fan, my dad actually is. So we follow the Dodgers and keep track on his his managerial career so far. And you obviously saw in the LDS, he's a little bit too loyal to his starters, especially Kershaw, and that came back to bite him. That was pretty bad, but I cannot think of anything that sort of matches just the amount of just confusion as to why this move took place. There's no I can't. Like I said, I will probably think about this for the entire offseason, and I will not be able to come up with any sort of justification as to why he was brought into that situation.
Well, I mean, we heard what Matheny's justification was, and it was sort of our worst nightmares realized, which was that you can't go with. I mean, the thing is, had Wacha gotten through the inning, he would be up third in the top of the 10th. Were you going to remove him from that? Were you going to pinch hit for him? If Carpenter or Jay had gotten on, were you going to let him bat? If you were going to pinch hit for him, why would you use Wacha, of all situations, an ultimate high leverage situation in which he only pitches one inning?
Right. Because he's a guy that if it goes to extra innings, he's a guy that you can throw for several innings, and I would be fine with him in that situation because he's used to being stretched out. He comes into that inning with a much different mindset than he would in any other situation. I mean, he's used to being a starter where he can sort of get into his groove. There, he's got to come in and come out firing. I mean, you've basically got to be a closer. He's never been a closer, at least not at the major league level. So it's just you're bringing in a guy who just shifting. Like, even whenever Martinez was brought in, like the fifth inning, I think it was game four. He's used to being used in the seventh or eighth, and then he's being brought in the fifth, and it's just people's roles kept getting shifted. I think that's why the Royals have been so good, is their relievers know their roles, and they've been stuck to those roles, and they've been effective in those roles. And I just kind of felt like we spent all season defining whose role was what. Neshek was the eighth inning guy, Rosenthal was the ninth inning guy. Then all of a sudden, you just abandon that philosophy at the most important time of the season, and it's truly baffling.
And I think the Royals probably get a little bit of the benefit of just the personnel that they have as well helps. Like, you can pretty easily have guys in roles if you have guys who are as shut down as Greg Holland or Wade Davis, but the Cardinals, I'm not sure who they would trust in that situation, but Waka definitely wouldn't be the first option there. However, it's over. The season's over. It's sad. It's upsetting, all that. Royals Giants should be an interesting World Series of teams that I don't think anyone predicted would make it to the ALCS and NLCS, much less the World Series. So,
Right.
go figure. But the offseason is now upon us, so let's just kind of quickly go through what moves can be made. Like, looking at catcher, obviously Yadi's going to end up being the starting catcher still at this point. He's still effective. He's still under contract, all that. I kind of worry about Tony Cruz as a long-term backup, especially if Yadi's an injury risk, because this was sort of his opportunity this year to shine and produce. And obviously he had a home run in Game 5, but for the most part was not particularly effective.
Especially defensively, and I've always been high on Tony Cruz as a backup. I thought he's always done well, but then somebody, it may have even been our friend Nick who mentioned it, that I think he was overexposed. He is a good backup, but he's been overexposed this season, and I think we were kind of seeing, we saw Tony Cruz play at a relatively high volume for him this season, and I don't think that there was anything that was spectacular about it. I mean, I think he had a walk-off, base hit earlier in the season, so he had some good moments, but just like the way that he defended that pass ball for Rosenthal, I mean, he basically turned his head and backhanded it and didn't even get his chest to block it down. I mean, granted, I'm not a catcher, but you have an idea of how you're supposed to block those kind of pitches. And
yeah, a runner shouldn't be able to score from second on that play. Obviously, he had a tough situation to handle because it was a truly terrible pitch from Rosenthal, but
right.
you got to put up more of a fight than that. But yeah, I'm not even sure who the catchers on the market are going to be, and I would seriously look at getting somebody who, maybe a former starter who could, maybe on the later end of his career, who'd be able to fill in if you needed him, rather than just sort of praying that Molina doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, and I don't even know what sort of interest they might have in bringing Pierzynski back. I mean, it seems like the clubhouse has liked him, which is sort of surprising to what we all thought might happen. I mean, I think he's the kind of guy that when he's on a good team, he can be a great teammate, but if he's on a bad team, he's probably a really bad teammate. So
yeah,
I think if they want to bring him back, I don't know that I would be all that opposed to it. I mean, he is a little bit older, but I think he's a guy that would understand his role in the locker room, and I think that over the course of a whole season could prove to be really valuable. But I think you're right. I mean, I think unfortunately we're getting to the point now where we kind of have to start thinking about what's next after Yadier Molina, and I don't think that they're going to find that person this offseason. But I think what I'm getting to when I'm saying this is that he may not be able to play every single day like we're used to. I mean, he may need a little bit more time off, especially if we want to keep him healthy in the postseason. Much like could say the same about Adam Wainwright. It's a really long season, and you don't want to burn them in June and July if that means that they're not going to be fully effective come October. I mean, I would much rather rest them at that point and have them be fresh come October. Kind of like what we've seen the Spurs do in the NBA, where they rest their starters throughout the season and they're fresh come the playoffs. So I would be fine with that sort of mentality and having a guy that you could trust, maybe not be Yachty, but sort of understands the game and understands that, playing through, once or twice a week, can come out and be effective.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Pierzynski's that guy either. I'm not as worried about Pierzynski with the clubhouse stuff as much as I am, is he an effective option?
Right.
I'm not sure that he or Cruz is, but I mean, and I'm not saying they should be going out and trying to get, Jonathan Lucroy or something like that as a backup. You just get somebody who can fill in if so need be. Like Russell Martin's going to be on the free agent market. They're not going after him. There's no reason to
Yeah,
go
he'll
that overboard for somebody that you're not going to end up having as your primary guy. As far as
a guy like Kurt Suzuki, I don't know what his availability is. I know there was some talk about getting him this season whenever they were looking at getting a catcher, but I think a guy like him who
that
started
type of player certainly.
right. That's who comes to mind. As soon as you presented the question, that's the first guy that came to mind. I just remember there was a lot of talk about potentially going after him around the deadline before they signed Pierzynski. So maybe a guy like him who's started and is just sort of a seasoned veteran that can spell Molina whenever he needs to be spelled.
Yeah, as far as Tony Cruz, he'll be arbitration eligible after this season, and he might be a candidate for being non-tendered. I'm not sure what exactly they're going to do with him, and
Right.
Descalzo would probably be the other candidate who's arbitration eligible who might just straight up not be given any sort of contract offer. Other than that, I think everybody who's eligible is going to at least get a 1-year deal out of it.
Right.
As far as expiring contracts, Jason Mott and Mark Ellis, I mean, they seemingly are as good as gone. It would be highly unlikely. Ellis is definitely gone. Mott, maybe you can give him a spring training invite, but I mean, what are you really going to do with him at this point?
Right, and it's unfortunate because I mean he's such a good guy and he's been so good. It just you hate it, but I mean the injury. I mean he has not been. I mean there were times whenever he showed that his velocity was back, but I mean the Cardinals are such a pitching-rich organization that unfortunately a guy like Mott is sort of expendable at this point. I mean they've got guys like Luke Weaver who they just drafted. They've got guys like Marco Gonzalez wanting to come up and take a major league roster spot. So many other guys that are sort of just, can come up and take that spot from him. So we'll see what happens with him, but I would not be surprised if he's just not brought back this year.
Yeah, as far as, they're not going to have to do a whole lot for him. Like, he's going to be out of there. Neshek probably is going to be able to get a contract somewhere else. Obviously, it'd be great if the Cardinals could get somebody like him back, but you have to figure that somebody's going to offer him a truckload of money that realistically probably isn't going to happen for the Cardinals. As far as the outfield, I've heard a lot of people saying that they want to trade away an outfielder, whether it be Jay, whether it be Borges, whether it be Grichuk, Taveras. I don't know that I really want to do that. What are your thoughts on the outfield situation?
I really hope they bring Jay back. I like him a whole lot. He's been playing the spot for so many years now, and I don't know. He's had a really good year, and there's a couple of times now they've tested him with his starting spot where they don't think that they bring in somebody thinking that they might take a spot. And he's just outplayed them, and that happened this year with Peter Borges. And I mean, I like Borges, but I just think that Jay is such a superior hitter to him, and really, I don't think you lose a ton on defense with him. So
yeah, I mean, this is essentially the fourth straight year that. As soon as the season ended, people said that John Jay has peaked, that this is as high of a value as we're going to get for him. I mean, maybe this is just what he is. Like, he's not the best center fielder in baseball by any means, but maybe he's just a guy who is what he has been.
Right.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I think it's strange that people have this feeling as though Peter Borges is sort of the safer pick, when Peter Borges' entire game, both on defense and on offense, really are predicated on speed, which is really the skill that, as you age, is going to go the fastest. It seems strange. Like, I'm not saying get rid of Borges. I'm all for keeping him around on the 1-year deal he'll get in arbitration, in which he'll end up getting paid a lot less.
Right, and so I sort of posed after the last game. I thought, will they trade Jay to see what kind of return they can get for him, because I think they can certainly get a higher return for him than they could, for Peter Borges or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. I really hope that they bring Jay back, just because I really like him. I think fans would like him, and I think he's a really good center fielder, and you could put him in the 2 spot. I think he's struggled at times. He's gone through struggling stretches, but I think over the course of the season, I think he had the same batting average for 2 straight seasons. So he's a guy that you're going to get from him every single year. What sort of defense you're going to get from him. So he's one guy that I will honestly kind of be disappointed if they don't bring him back.
Yeah, the problem is, like, you can even if you can get value for Jay or Borges or whomever in the outfield, who are the Cardinals trying to get? Like, you can trade them, and maybe you're probably get a player who's of roughly that ability, but at a different position. But at what position is there really a need? You're looking at like backup catcher, getting somebody who can play against lefties whenever instead of Adams at first. Like, who are you looking, maybe middle relief help? You're not going to trade John Jay or any of the other outfielders for that guy. That's sort of where I find it questionable. Like, if you're going to get Aroldis Chapman for one of these guys, by all means do it. But you're not going to get that. You're looking at getting somebody who's sort of a marginal player.
Right.
At this point, I think all of the outfield options are interesting. Tavares maybe has the highest ceiling, but he's also the guy that's proven at the least at the major league level. I don't want to trade the guy because I think the guy could be really good, but at the same time, I don't want to abandon all of the other alternatives to him.
Mm-hmm.
Because what if this is what Tavares is? What if he's not what we thought he was going to be? At that point, you're stuck with him. But if you keep the other guys around, you're not.
Right. I totally agree.
Did you have any other questions, concerns about the postseason you wanted, or not the postseason, the offseason you wanted to bring up?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel pretty comfortable about their starting rotation going into next season. I think that they've got, they brought in Lackey this year, who I think obviously is going to be back next year, and I think they're pretty well set in that position. I think they may try to pick up a reliever or two just to sort of fortify the bullpen. But I mean, Choate's brought back for next year, so they've got that lefty specialist. I think we'll see Marco Gonzalez up at the major league level. I think the roster's pretty well set, aside from maybe a few minor moves that they might make in the offseason.
Yeah, I think that the moves they make are going to be minor. I would much rather they spend money on giving Lanslin an extension, looking into extensions for other players, just because those are guys who are going to long-term be a part of this club, as opposed to just giving, just throwing money at random guys that you're not going to have that much use to.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think that pretty much wraps up what we were going to cover. Definitely thank you very much for spending part of your birthday here to talk about baseball and sports and all that good stuff.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, wish you a great day. Hope you have a good one. Hope everybody who's listening enjoys and enjoyed listening, and we'll hope everybody has fun in the off season. I know I sure will probably be bored, but we'll cope with it in our own ways. Thank you very much.